Greetings, MechWarriors. This is Blackhawk SC. I've been cleaning up some of my older videos lately, and I saw that the Stormcrow related videos were really in need of attention. I'm also going to take this opportunity to try out a new format for my guides, which I'll call the multi-guide. In the multi-guides, I'll be going over several builds for a chassis instead of a single one. And I think a great way to debut this format is to use one of the most versatile medium mech chassis in the game. I'll only be using this format when it's appropriate. Sometimes there are only one or two builds that really shine on a chassis. But for the Stormcrow, there are so many options, which makes it difficult to limit it to just one build. For this guide, I'll list the builds in order of my personal preference, and also since this is going to be a fairly long video, I've put timestamps in the description so you can quickly access specific sections. Before we get into the core of the guide, I'll mention that some of the gameplay was recorded a couple of patches ago. I don't think the meta shifted that much during this time, so I haven't gone back to redo the gameplay videos. The biggest thing that happened during this time was the introduction of the Kodiak. But this is just another assault that the Stormcrow should avoid direct engagements with, so it doesn't change much for the chassis. I think it's always good to discuss a chassis' position in the current meta. If you've been playing for a while, you may remember when the Stormcrow first came out. It was by a fair margin at that time the best medium mech in the game. It moved like a medium while only taking a small penalty for losing a side torso, and carried the firepower of a heavy mech. Fast forward to 2016, nerfs to the skill tree, clan weaponry, the clan XL engine, and positive quirks for its inner sphere competitors brought it back down to earth. Now, it's not nearly as tanky as before, and it easily gets outtraded by heavies and many medium mechs as well. Furthermore, nearly every role it can play can be done at least slightly better by another medium mech. Having said all this though, the Stormcrow still retains its advantage of having fairly good hitboxes, high top speed, and high firepower. As with other mediums, your primary playstyle isn't to trade one for one against other mechs, but to use your speed to get free damage from an angle that the enemy isn't looking at, to get out of bad positions, and to get into positions where you can isolate mechs that you can dispatch quickly. So let's jump right into the first build. My favorite build right now on the Stormcrow is the 6 medium pulse laser build. There are many variations of the MPL build, such as 5 MPLs, a left side oriented version, and one with 2 MPLs on the side torsos. I do prefer this one because as long as you're able to shield with your left side, your firepower does not decrease when you lose a side torso. You also need to expose less of your mech when you peek from a corner. So why is this my favorite build? Well, first of all, with the MPL range module in TC, the optimal range of the lasers go to 376 meters, which allows you to engage and be effective for most of a typical solo queue match. Shorter range builds, while they can be effective, sometimes run into issues where the team doesn't get close and you have to perform risky flanks to do anything during the match. Longer range builds are generally less heat efficient and forces you to use longer duration lasers. As I mentioned before, the Stormcrow can't really take many hits, so being able to aim and get your damage out in under a second is highly beneficial. Another reason why I like the MPL build is that it's one of the few cases where MPLs can actually work well. For lighter mechs, typically the ER medium lasers are more tonnage efficient, and for heavier mechs, the clan large pulse laser and large pulse laser ER medium laser combo are preferred for their alpha size and range. While the weapon itself isn't too bad, no other weapon really synergizes well with the MPLs, which makes good MPL builds kind of rare and interesting to play. The build is pretty easy to set up, and if you don't want a TC, go ahead and drop that. But I think it's worth it because of the little bonuses that you get. Also, with almost all of my Stormcrow builds, you'll see that I don't use the lower arm actuators, so I don't get that lateral movement between my arm and torso weapons. The general theme of this build is that you should play it like a heavy escort. Try to find engagements where you're being supported by a heavier, tankier mech and you don't get shot. If the match starts out at long range, be patient until it gets within 400 meters, or follow mechs that are taking the fight to the enemy. You neither have the speed or firepower to fight by yourself typically. Although if you do find trade opportunities with lower firepower mechs, go ahead and take them. Now let's go into a gameplay video and see how to run it. So in this match we're on Grim Plexus. I think this is a good match to show how you can play in kind of a long-range map. Grimplexes typically tend to begin at 1,000-meter range and kind of ends up in a brawl when one team decides to push. So I think one of the key things here is because you're at that 370-meter range or so, you're really looking to be patient and wait until the match gets into that range. And maybe before it gets into range, you might be able to do a little bit of anticipation, I guess, of where the push is going to come from or where your team is going to push. And so here we're just getting set up. This is what a lot of teams do. They head towards kind of like their hill, I guess you could say, at the beginning of the match. And right here I'm just kind of looking around to see, just to see whether there's any enemies going to the enemy team's hill. So I at least would have a plan of attack later on. Okay, we see an enemy there. It's an Ebon Jaguar. Ebons a lot of times carry a longer range weapon, so I'm gonna stay out of the way. And what we're trying to look for here is to see if there's any more, enemies going towards that hill. It's not absolutely the safest thing to do to be exposed out that much with that kind of range, my range. But at the same time, I want to take a look to see if it's just an isolated Ebon Jaguar or not. We're not really seeing anything, and this Atlas here is doing the same thing. He's staying behind cover until the match gets closer. So we do have these two guys over at Delta 6 moving forward, and I'm gonna follow them. Again, you're playing sort of like the escort role. The Timberwolf and the Blackjack have a good amount of firepower, so these are good mechs to follow. If it was something light or whatever, like I wouldn't be so motivated, you could say, to follow them. So while the Blackjack and the Timberwolf are gonna go towards that right side, I'm gonna take another angle to see if I'm not gonna follow directly behind them, right? And I'm gonna see if I can shoot enemies from an angle that they're not expecting, like that. See, this slope of the hill is very useful. It matches the slope of my weapons very well, and that's one of my preferred engagement angles. If I can find these kind of angles to shoot from, that's really the best thing to do. You're doing minimal exposure while being able to get your alpha out. As we also saw that Ebon Jaguar lost his, I believe, left torso. Again, we're trying to not take shots. You got assaults on my left side, and then you got heavies and things like that on my right side. So we're not, the focus of attention here. So that Ebon Jaguar, remember, we took off one of his side torsos. So when we remember that, we go for the other side torso and kill it. And that Atlas is engaged, so we can, again, use that hill to our advantage here. And you can see how quickly that damage gets put out with the medium pulse lasers, as opposed to, say, maybe the ERMLs or large pulse. You can see, look at where your teammates are poking from, especially like the assaults and things like that. The enemy team is generally going to look at the assaults, which is usually a wise thing to do. But that gives you the opportunity to poke from a different angle, right? So here we're getting just some free damage off of that stalker. And the Stalker's obviously wise to pay attention to the Atlas. That's an XL King Crab. I don't really recommend XLs on 100-ton assault mechs, IS assault mechs, but you know, each their own, I guess. Warhammer, usually it's a XL engine, but I think that one was not an XL Warhammer. But no matter, his CT was red open, so we'll take him out on the second shot. And you know, I would often recommend running XL engines on Warhammers. You're just so much more effective, like when you're not getting shot at. So, and you know, when you lose a side torso, your CT is oftentimes just open anyways, and you're gonna die on the next shot. So, it's not always worth it to have a standard engine. But you know, it's whatever you're comfortable with, I guess. And that's game. I don't that team damage must have come from the Atlas. I scraped him, I think. Our next build is a variation of the classic laser vomit build. This build has evolved somewhat during the Stormcrow's existence, with the first builds packing on 6 ER medium lasers and an LPL across both arms and side torsos. This is before the introduction of the B and A arm omnipods that allowed for asymmetric builds which put all the lasers on a single side. This build was the one that made the Stormcrow the king of medium mechs when it was first introduced. But as I mentioned, balance changes made it so that it's no longer as amazing as it once was. Nowadays, the most popular variations use 4 to 5 ERMLs and an LPL, or dual LPLs, which I'll demo later on. This here is the form that I prefer because I feel that 5 ERMLs give me a good balance between the need to make a heat-efficient build while delivering a good-sized alpha that makes it worth the face time. I also like this asymmetric build because I personally feel I can shield well with the left side. Sometimes you do get that right arm shot off, which only leaves you with 2 weapons. But if you can protect that right side well, it's going to be better. Moving one ER medium laser from the arm to the left torso isn't a bad idea either, and both configurations have their merits. This build does play similarly to the MPL build, except you're attempting to engage at a longer range. If you find yourself getting in 300 meters, it had better be that you have no better options, or you're just trying to finish off some enemies. You don't have the DPS for an extended engagement, and on a hot map, you're good for less than 2 alphas without a cooldown period in between. Because of the long duration of the ER, MLs, and LPL, you must try to keep your aim as steady as possible when you're firing to try to concentrate the damage on as few components as you can. Here, the removal of the lower arm actuator really helps to concentrate the damage. Another thing to remember is that if you're getting shot back, or even if you anticipate getting shot back, you should get back to cover before your lasers finish their burn. Just as with other Stormcrows and other mediums in general, avoid 1v1 engagements with other mechs unless you believe you're able to outtrade it. Alright, so let's get into some gameplay. Alright, in this match we're on Crimson Straits. Crimson Straits on this side of the map really favors this build. Crimson Straits in general gives you long range, short range, and mid range opportunities. It's a fairly balanced map in terms of range. So having that mid range option allows you to be pretty effective, during the course of the match. This side also allows you to poke up to the platform using just your right side. There's a lot of cover that allows you to poke right and expose just your right side if you want to shoot mechs up or under the platform on the other side. I feel like although it's a balanced map in terms of range, I do feel like Crimson Straits is actually less balanced on the other side. It's more favorable if you start off from this side. Okay, here we go. We see an ERPPC flying over, but unfortunately, it took me a little while to realize the summoner it's on the top of the mountain. Now the summoner, this dual EPP summoner,
Heat level critical.
although it's alpha, it's lower than ours. Its damage is pinpoint, and so that's 20 pinpoint damage plus 10 splash damage across the torso areas if it hits your CT. You can trade with it if the pilot isn't really good with his shots, if he's missing that shot, but that pilot was, hitting most of his shots, and you kind of had to make that judgment call whether you want to engage or not in that situation.
New target acquired.
And because, he was hitting my CT, or he was hitting me with his shots, I want to just avoid any further engagements with him. Now, I really want to not shoot that Locust and shoot the Jägermech behind the building, but because he was not showing himself, I just took a shot at the Locust. So in general, you want to prioritize larger mechs if you can. Notice how we're not trying to get close, any closer than this range, because, we have targets to shoot at 450, so why not, right? Why would you move to this area unless he moved out of range?
Warning, incoming missile.
Or moved out of position, moved out of sight, I would say. Now here you have these buildings, and we want to utilize these buildings to our advantage here. If you position yourself between these buildings, you can get into a position where you're only exposing that right side to shoot under the platform, like we're doing here.
Target acquired.
And this, in case they're under the platform or above the platform, usually they're within that, 500 to 400 meter range, maybe a little bit further. And so this is just the ideal range for us to be in.
New target acquired.
And we moved to the left side just because we're just not getting any shots. So we're just looking for these angles where we can be useful. Now, if you're getting hot, if you're getting heat warnings, I would recommend cooling down to 40-something% before sticking your head out again to potentially doing an alpha.
Target acquired. New target acquired.
Again, we're just letting other people
New
get
target
closer,
acquired.
engage at a closer distance. We don't really want to just get too close and expose ourselves all that much.
Target acquired. New target acquired.
That blackjack is cord CT. And we just barely avoided that PPC shot.
Target acquired. New target acquired.
Again, so even if you're at that, 400 something meter range, you
Target
still have
acquired.
to be careful and make good calls about, what to
target
trade
acquired.
against. Because a lot of things can hit you at that range.
Man, I
Inner
should've saved
sphere,
them.
large pulse
Acquired.
lasers, large lasers, PPCs,
target
PPCs,
acquired.
Gauss rifles, a lot of stuff, a lot of builds
Target
can
acquired.
hit you and really out damage you at that range. Okay, so you see we're also we're again using that
Acquired.
the slope of that hill to our
Target
advantage.
destroyed.
The slope of the hill is
Acquired.
matching
New
our
target acquired.
weapon profile, I guess you could say, very well.
New target
Okay, we see
acquired.
that. We see that blackjack is core CT. We just need to put one more shot onto it,
Target
and there it
destroyed.
goes.
Heat level critical.
That's
New
one thing.
target acquired.
If a mech is close to dying, just make sure you
Target
finish it off.
destroyed.
Just, take that extra shot if you have to, and move. Sometimes maybe take a risk to get that,
Target acquired.
to get the final shot off.
New target
Don't let him
acquired.
live.
One just came out of the tunnel.
New target acquired.
Watch that, might be more.
Heat level critical.
Okay, as we're getting hot, we're just gonna cool down.
New target acquired. Heat level critical.
We should ideally cool down to under 40% before we poke again. But here I make,
Heat level critical.
not this time, but I do make a mistake over here,
Heat level critical.
overheating. Before I had started engaging before I reached
Critical
40%, and
damage.
thankfully
Destroyed.
was able to shield with the left arm before I took the dual Gauss.
Target destroyed. New target acquired.
So do be very careful overheat. Overheating in the Stormcrow is really bad. You just really cannot take many shots. I mean, most mechs can probably at least maybe take off a component in 2 or 3 seconds
Target destroyed.
when you're overheating,
New target acquired.
if not outright kill you. So I think hopefully you'll notice that we're at least trying our best to keep our lasers steady during our
New
burn,
target
especially when the enemy's not looking at you.
Target
Obviously
destroyed.
it can be difficult, but
Target
try as best
acquired.
as you can to keep that laser steady. If you're trading with an enemy, obviously sometimes you gotta get back into cover. You gotta take that snapshot, that twitch reaction shot, and then But if the enemy is not looking at you, just try to keep that burn on the target, on the CT, hopefully, or side torso, for as long as possible. This next build is essentially another laser vomit variation with some major differences. First, the dual LPLs give you a legitimate option at longer ranges, so you can stay and poke from 600 meters or further before the battle gets into mid-range. In fact, you should try to stay at that range as much as possible, because your mid-range DPS isn't as high due to its lower heatsink count. This build is also hotter than the build we previously saw, so heat management is very important. Not even your dual LPLs are heat neutral. So if you notice, I often configure a heat neutral weapon group for weapon group 3. And in this case, my heat neutral weapon group is just a single LPL. If you haven't yet learned how to manage heat well, you may want to avoid this build, but I think it's worth a try. Now in general, I think the normal laser vomit with the 5 ERMLs is better, but when you do get maps like Canyon, Polar, and Alpine, this build can really shine. Actually, this sort of build is probably better on the Hunchback 2C, because its jump jets allow you to move into great sniping positions on nearly every map. But with the Stormcrow, you're sort of doing the same thing, but using your speed instead to get good angles and gain range on the target. When the battle does get into mid-range though, you do have a good sized alpha with ERMLs that make your face time worthwhile. I do want to mention that there is a 3 LPL build that I've seen played, but I feel that the build makes a gamble that the map voting outcome will be favorable to long-range pokes. If you end up getting Mining Collective or Viridian Bog, for example, you're not going to be able to use your range as effectively, whereas dual LPL build is also fairly effective at those mid-ranges. Now let's go into a gameplay video. Alright, in this match we're on Canyon Network, which favors longer range engagements, at least in the beginning. What would be even better on this map would be the Hunchback 2C, because it can jump and carry the same loadout, and jump jets will allow you to get into different positions on the canyon where the Stormcrow is not able to. But it still works pretty well, just because of how strong the large pulse laser is at that 600 to 700 meter range.
Target acquired.
So we get up this ramp here, and this position will give us pretty good sightlines to the enemy's likely position at the range that we want to engage in. They're typically going to be at that C5-ish area, over to you see right there. They're kind of NASCARing around the back of that canyon wall, which is pretty much at our ideal range.
Airstrike online.
You see also even though the medium lasers don't do that much damage at 600 meters, we still take that shot anyways, because
Target acquired.
we're at pretty much base heat capacity, and then just even that a little bit of damage will help. That Warhawk, I think it was a Warhawk. Well, I'm able to trade with it because, it's not hitting its shots. So if it was hitting its shots, like
Target
in one of my
acquired.
earlier videos with the summoner, I'm gonna just avoid it. Now you see, I twisted as soon as I saw that Warhawk because he was able to get the first visual on me where I was still firing my weapons, or just finished firing my weapons. So um, I'm not gonna stare further at it and then risk taking a shot. See, my back armor just dropped a bit. I'm not sure if it's from someone from the back. It looked like it was friendly fire, but I wasn't sure. Sometimes MW has this bug where frontal damage will hit your rear, but I think it was friendly fire at that time.
New target acquired. New target acquired.
See, now the match is starting to get mid-range-ish. So that we got
Heat level critical.
a few good
New
pokes
target
at that
acquired.
600-meter range. We're having to start our mid-range engagements
Target
right
acquired.
now.
New target acquired.
This would be a really great time for, to be running, say, like the Hunchback to C8. Then we can
Target
kind of jump
acquired.
over to the other
New
side
target
of the
acquired.
canyon, over to that Delta 4 area, and continue to range these enemies over at this Charlie 3 hill. But we can't do that, so we try to gain as much distance as possible. But while we're trying to increase distance, we have this opportunity here to help out with a Centurion. So we'll just go and do that.
Target destroyed. New target acquired.
So now that the Centurion's finished off,
Target
we are
acquired.
going back to attempting to range our enemies here,
Target acquired.
at least a little bit.
New target
At least get
acquired.
into some better positions.
Heat level critical. New target acquired. Heat level critical.
You can see we're at the mid range now, and we're still able to do pretty decent pokes.
Heat level
Right now.
critical.
I misjudged my heat a little bit there.
Heat level critical. Heat level critical. New target acquired.
So
New
we're
target
we're constantly
acquired.
trying to find these positions where we
Heat
just need to
level
expose that
critical.
right side.
New target acquired.
So I saw the
Target
catapult
missile.
pretty close, and I'm assuming that he's going to come
New
and try to
target
push us.
acquired.
And I'm going to use my teammates back
New
here to help me.
target
And he
acquired.
kind of takes the bait, and he loses a side torso because of that.
Heat level critical. New target acquired.
Yeah, like when you poke from a side,
Activated.
the best thing is just to assume that there's a whole bunch of enemies there and poke carefully. If you don't poke carefully and you assume that there's just one mech that you saw, you might get into these kind of situations where you lose a side torso or die.
Target destroyed.
So we
New
apparently
target acquired.
almost kind of baited two enemy mechs, the Highlander and
New target
the
acquired.
catapult, into that kind of a trap there.
New target acquired. Heat
Here we're
level
using
critical.
our range again, at least for the first couple of
New
shots.
target acquired.
Sorry, I got in front of
Heat
this
level
dire wolf over
critical.
here, but
New target acquired.
I assumed that he would be careful, and he was.
New target acquired. Target acquired. Heat level critical. Target destroyed. New target acquired.
Here I'm not
Heat
worried
level
about heat as much
critical.
because we're just cleaning up right
Target
now.
destroyed. New target acquired.
But I think what you can see from this gameplay
Heat
video
level
is
critical.
that, again, we're not directly trying to challenge 1v1 enemy mechs. Trying to use range as much as possible. and having to fight at the mid-range when we need to.
Target acquired. Target destroyed. Target acquired.
We're just finishing up right now.
Acquired.
I'm gonna try to aim for the legs on the cheetah.
Heat level critical. Heat level critical. Target destroyed.
I took out both of his legs, I think, in one shot. I think. Maybe not. For this next build, I'm going to talk about one of two short-range builds I like on the Stormcrow. The first one, and the one that I enjoy playing a little bit more, is the 12 small pulse laser build, otherwise known as the Partycrow. For those who are relatively new to MechWarrior Online and is wondering why it's called the Partycrow, it's a reference to the Party Pack, which is a 9 SPL Hunchback 4P build that was made famous by the Beef. If you haven't seen the video, do check it out because it's pretty funny. Unlike other builds I talked about earlier, I don't think there's any other reasonable configurations for the Partycrow other than this one that I'm showing right now. On the surface, 12 SPLs may look hot, but actually the Clan SPL is tied with the IS SPL for the best damage to heat ratio energy weapon in the game. This is in addition to having 20 double heat sinks, which gives us good heat capacity and heat dissipation. On a normal map, you're good for about 2.5 alpha strikes or 180 points of damage before having to cool down. With this kind of firepower, you can even 1v1 some heavy mech builds if you need to do it. However, your main playstyle is to use your speed to strike from the side or rear of an enemy, ideally when they're isolated, or by catching a mech that's lagging behind the most in a push. You never want to push into multiple enemy mechs when they're looking at you, and especially if you have to cross over 200 meters of open terrain. For weapon groupings, I have one group for the right arm SPLs, one group for the torso and left arm SPLs. And my heat neutral weapon group is the 4 left arm SPLs. I do want to warn you that this is perhaps one of the harder builds to play well in. First, the effectiveness of the SPLs is highly dependent on you being able to concentrate damage to as few components as possible. If your aim isn't steady, that 72 points of damage is going to spread a lot, which means you may take too much damage during the brawl, or even be killed by the mech you're engaging. As a medium mech, you can't sustain a brawl for that long, so it's important that you try to kill the enemy as quickly as possible. Or you can strike from a position where you can get back to safety quickly. Second, you need good situational awareness. For example, making sure you're engaging an isolated mech and you don't suddenly see 2 other mechs in a corner that you're not paying attention to. Third, you have to make sure you don't hit Ghost Heat by firing your 2 weapon groups within a half second of each other. If you make that mistake, you'll shut down for a very long time and you'll most likely die. Even if you make no mistakes, short-range builds sometimes just aren't able to influence the game's end result because your team sometimes doesn't push and you won't have a chance to do any significant damage. In this case, you just have to move on to the next game and hope for a better team. For those games, there's nothing you can do other than making a suicidal flank into a blob of enemies, which is equally bad for you and the team. But despite all these warnings, in most public queue matches, a brawl does happen at some point before the game has been decided. This is why I can still recommend this build for more experienced players. So now let's get into a gameplay demo. So this match that we wanted to demo takes place on Polar Highlands. I've actually had better games than this while I was recording gameplay videos for this build. But I think I like this match because even though it wasn't the highest damage, highest kill match that I got, it shows some key considerations when when you're playing like a typically long-range map such as Polar Highlands. So Polar Highlands is is good and bad for this build. It's not ideal because it is again a longer range map with kind of sparse cover, I guess you could say. And but it's good in that it's cold, and then when you do get into these brawl situations, you dissipate heat very quickly, well, as quickly as is allowed in MWO, and then you can actually kill mechs that are very quickly. So in the beginning of the match, we're not pushing the furthest ahead. A lot of times when I'm, in the solo queue match, I tend to push out pretty far ahead of the other team with, like a mid-range to long-range weapons. But of course, in this case, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let these other mechs who are perhaps, longer range take the peaks for me and scout. Because, I don't want to take like an ERPPC or a Gauss shot just randomly as I'm looking to see where the enemy is. And I'm sitting just behind this snow hill here and just being patient. Some parts of this gameplay will be boring because, I'm just going to be waiting for either for information or, for an engagement to happen. Okay, so now we've gotten a contact from enemy. Oh, one thing that I wanted to mention was that in the brawl situation, these directional arrows that we see in the minimap is really important, and the fact that they took it away in the latest patch, I think I'm gonna miss it, I guess. Maybe we'll see if they have some way of adding it back in future patches. We don't know, but these directional arrows are quite important to me in this match, in this particular match. As you can see right now, a lot of our guys over at I think it's J8 or I think it's I8. Yeah, I8 is looking over at the Hotel 8 direction, so I'm thinking the majority of the enemies are there. Now I'm positioning myself at H9 to sort of prepare for any sort of flanking opportunities. But what we see right now is two lights that are engaging our direwolf over here. And now, even though this isn't the primary responsibility of this build, one of the secondary responsibilities of a brawling medium is to get lights off of your heavies and assaults. So, you don't want to waste. You don't want assaults and heavies to waste their time trying to hit lights and things like that. You want to try to drive them away as soon as possible and let the big guys handle the other big guys on the enemy team. So we're trying to do our part here and just either doing damage or just driving away these locusts.
Target destroyed.
And as you can see, if we don't kill the enemy lights quickly enough, everybody is like looking over. Everybody's trying to chase a squirrel, right? It's a very common thing and very common behavior in MWO public queue matches, and it's unavoidable, I guess you could say. It's bad, but it's unavoidable, so you have to try to prevent that. Do your part and try to prevent that as much as you can. Over here, I'm hearing some radar deprivation blips, so I'm just checking to see if there's any UAVs. And now we see there's LRMs coming over around Hotel 8. So we're suspecting there's an LRM over at the rear. And so yeah, we see more LRMs. So we're gonna go and check that out. And we do see a Mad Dog. The Mad Dog only has 4 medium lasers as backup weapons, and that's just not gonna be enough to take on the Stormcrow. You can see how quickly the Stormcrow does damage and kills that mech. It's just the 4 medium lasers are just not enough. That Mad Dog was out of position, totally out of position. He shouldn't have been so far back, and he got punished for it. So we also saw before we went to engage these marauders, we saw that the directional arrows of the red triangles were pointing to we're pointing to like away from us, so we can go and engage. And we caught one from the back and dispatched it with just a couple of shots. See, the marauders are actually kind of tough because they can spread damage between their. Even though sometimes you're trying to hit their CT, you're actually hitting their side torsos. Even at that range, it can be kind of difficult. So we took a little bit of time to try to kill that marauder, but you know, in the end, we destroyed both marauders.
Target destroyed.
And it's 11-7. We're pretty much just cleaning up. We have the damage advantage.
Target destroyed.
Thanks for the game. Nice knocking.
And that is game. Again, just having patience, making sure you put your damage in as few components as possible, and that's how you win the game. The last build that I want to talk about is the Splatcrow. My configuration has 4 small pulse lasers and 4 SRM6s with Artemis. You'll notice that this is the only build where I don't use a TC because we're sorely lacking heat sinks, and having an additional heat sink is going to be a better value for our tonnage. 2 other configurations that you can try out is one that uses 3 SPLs and an extra DHS, or a 5th SRM6 launcher on the right arm, and dropping the lasers completely. I personally like having the bigger alpha potential in the public queue match, so I keep the 4th laser. This is because you're not always going to be in a full brawl all the time, and sometimes you're striking and fading, which is when the extra alpha can benefit. Also, compared with the all SRM build, I like being able to use the precision of the SPLs to be able to finish off a component if I need to. SRMs just don't do as good of a job as SPLs in finishing off the last 10 to 20 points of health on a weak component, because they're not as accurate. Now, I went over the playstyle and the dangers of short-range builds earlier on in the SPL build, so I'm not going to repeat them here. However, there are several major differences with the Splatcrow. First, your effective range is actually lower than the SPL build. Although SRMs do damage at 270, their spread is so huge that you don't get good concentration and damage until you get to about 100 meters. The SPLs, on the other hand, do concentrated damage at 188 meters with the range module and TC. So you're ideally getting as close as possible to the target before firing off your SRMs. Second, this build has a definite shield side, which is the laser side. I'd really rather much lose my lasers than the SRMs, as the SRMs are my primary DPS weapons. You can, by the way, move the lasers to either side of the Stormcrow, but my preference is the right side. Third, you don't have to fire your weapons in 2 groups, since the SPLs and SRMs don't ghost heat with each other. Therefore, you can and should shield as soon as you shoot. When you're playing this mech, you can go ahead and use the lasers on the first alpha or 2, starting from base heat. But on the subsequent shots, I would recommend staying away from the lasers and just use your SRMs for maximum DPS. Again, after the first couple of salvos, I'd only use the lasers if I know I'm going to be able to finish off a critical component. This build is, I would say, the hardest build to pull off good games in among the ones I've talked about, just because of how short range it is. But I do want to talk about it because it is still a viable short range build which adds variety to the chassis, even though I don't think it's the best. Where this does shine though is in scouting mode, and is one of the best clan builds for that game mode. But in the following segment, I'm going to demo how to play this in the public queue. So in this match, we're on Forest Colony.
Reactor online.
Now, Forest Colony is a good mixed range map. Has good brawl opportunities as well as mid-range opportunities, and from certain angles you can get good long-range shots as well. So before the last patch, maybe I could call it the Phoenix Hawk patch. the fights on forest colonies usually center around the arch, so this is where we're gonna go. I think with the new forest colony, with the mountain pass being opened a little bit wider, it gives the enemy team over at that spawns on the other side a flanking option to go through the mountainside and hit this side from the left. But this is not a path that is usually taken before the patch, so what we're going to do here is just go over to kind of near the usual engagement area of the arch. As I mentioned in one of my gameplay videos earlier, if I'm in a shorter range build, I'm not going to go out and scout too much. If I'm poking my head out and get shot by a long range weapon, it's just not going to be worth it. And if I was in a mid range build or maybe a long range build, what I would do is just try to look to see, at likely directions of movements by the enemy team. But here I have I'm potentially get a shot at them, right? But I'm definitely not going to be able to reach them at like 600 meters with this build. So I'm going to let my other teammates do the scouting for me. And we're just going to sit here for just a little bit and then wait for the action to get close. And this might be the boring part of the video where we are just sitting around being patient. I'm trying my best not to poke my head out.
New target acquired.
By sitting here around Gulf 7, I have an option to flank left and flank right, depending on where the enemy pushes. Typically, they're going to push our left side. Typical public queue NASCAR. But if they did, try to push around this Hotel 8, the gap between Hotel 8 and Gulf 8, then we also can maybe flank to the left as well. So this position kind of gives us options. One of the things that kind of bothers me sometimes when I play short range builds is that if my team takes too many of us on our team takes short range builds and there's no critical mass to push, it's a real problem. Like that's why sometimes if I get like really just to prevent stalemates when I'm with like a really passive team, like I typically will prefer like mid-range to long-range builds in the public queue.
New target acquired.
So it does kind of appear that we do have a lot of maybe shorter range mechs that are not ready to engage in this match. But we're just going to be patient here. So we have 3 friendlies going out into the water. I really don't want to follow them because, going to the water means that you're, if there's mechs, which there obviously are at I-9, they're going to be shoot at me from mid-range and I can't return fire. So I'm not going to follow those guys, and I'm going to rejoin the main group over at Gulf 8. There seems to be a lot of activity over near the arch anyways, so I'm going to look for our engagement opportunities here instead.
New target acquired. Target acquired. New target acquired.
Looks like a lot of the enemy teams, based on the directional arrows, are trying to head to our left. Unfortunately, they removed the directional arrows for this last patch, and hope to see those back, really. That was a bummer. Well, since we saw like a whole bunch going towards Gulf 9, we decided to take a risk, go to the shoreline, and maybe flank from behind. We saw something at Hotel 9, so we saw multiple Hotel 9. That's why we decided to go towards the middle here.
New target acquired. Target acquired.
The idea here was to try to flank behind the king crab, but then we meet a gargoyle, which are usually shorter range builds, so you got to be careful. And then see, this is what I was talking about with being able to alpha.
New target acquired.
This is kind of like the skirmish and fade kind of playstyle I was talking about, and you're not necessarily going full brawl. You're not always going full brawl with this build. And so we realized we were in a bad situation. We were getting shot from Hotel 9. We were potentially getting shot by the king crab and the gargoyle, which is covering the other side of the rock. So that was kind of not a good position for us, so we decided to get out. We were shielding with our right arm, as you saw. We can afford, sort of, to lose that right arm if needed. Now I come here because it seemed like that rock wasn't a really good place to engage in. I couldn't isolate mechs as much as I wanted to. So I saw there was something here, and decided to... Killing this mech here also gave us the back of the enemy as well. So, as you can see, we were able to sneak up behind our enemies. Lost my pulse lasers, but that's okay. Don't really need them. Here's what I was talking about. Just try to get close. The closer you get, the more effective your SRMs are.
Target acquired. New target acquired.
So we back off because we need to cool. We saw that we were close to our heat cap there.
New target acquired. Target destroyed. New target acquired. Target destroyed.
And that is game. Alright, this concludes my Stormcrow multi-guide. If you enjoyed the gameplay or learned something, do give me a like, and subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more NWO content. If you have any questions or suggestions, do leave it in the comments below, and I try to respond to as many of them as I can. See you next time, everyone.